What's up, everyone? Today, I wanted to take a bit more of an optimistic approach to the US men's national team. There hasn't been much to be happy about other than qualifying recently. So I really wanted to take a look at our youth pipeline and talent development. So I brought in Marcus Chairez, who you might know as Marcus Kai on Twitter. He is an expert in all things youth teams and scouting. So I hope you enjoy. And if you learned something new, make sure to like this video. I would love it if we could get to 500 likes on this. Thanks so much and enjoy. For anyone that doesn't know you, you're a big part of the Twitter community for the US men's national team. You track a lot of the young players that are in our pool, but personally, I think you have a lot of the relevant and pragmatic takes that I love to see on Twitter that seem rare these days with some of our more upset fan base. But tell the people watching who you are, what you're all about, and what you're here to talk about today.
Yeah, thank you. The feeling is mutual. I think one thing I respect about your channel and your perspective is that there's a level of empathy and calm-headedness that sometimes we don't always see on social media in general. So I think the more of that from, any community, but the USMNT community is good for everyone. So thank you. So I honestly got into the USMNT sort of soccer community a couple years ago. I fell in love with the team in college at Santa Clara University and really stayed in kind of the background for a long time. And as I saw this kind of new generation of players emerging, I just wanted to kind of be more of a proactive voice in everything that was going on. I've always had an interest in scouting. I actually used to do a little bit of work in American football scouting, ironically enough, and am a success story of sort of like not caring about American football too much anymore and really focusing all of my attention on soccer. So yeah, I spend a lot of my my spare time looking at up and coming players in the U.S. soccer world. Like all of us, spending a lot of time focusing on the senior team, but felt like there could be more voices in the kind of youth soccer community, more people bringing different perspectives. And so that's where I've been focusing a lot of my attention.
Awesome. I'd love to just dive deeper today into not just like what the U20 and U17 US teams look like, but at a truly local level. We'll get to the GA Cup and some of the teams and players that were there, but really just taking like a wider, more holistic approach at our talent pipeline and not necessarily focusing so much on the dedicated youth national teams that the US calls up. But I want to start because recently you put a Twitter post out that was really digging into the pipeline to the pros and really trying to figure out like where do the pros come from now, whether it's MLS or European academies. How do people actually become professionals and join the US national team in the future? What did you find? Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, including updated odds on the NBA playoffs, fights, and even next season's fixtures. And don't forget that Major League Baseball is back as well. Who are you picking to win the World Series this year? BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino and poker games. It's super easy to get started, so head to the website today or use your mobile device to join and use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Yeah, something I had been sort of just documenting, sketching notes about over the last few months, inspired a bit by Justin Moran. I think his handle is Kickwish, and he put something out there that was sort of looking like where successful pros coming from, and so I wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that. And the short answer is it's just changing pretty, I'd say, pretty drastically. And part of that change is the evolution of MLS academies or US soccer academies in general, more MLS clubs seeing the value in playing young players, not just for on-field performance, but for, commercial performance for the club. And so as more clubs are kind of defining that pathway, I think you're seeing players see different ways to get to the highest levels of competition in Europe. So, so it's changing. And I'd also say that it's not always going to be like one path is the right path. I think you hear that a lot. And I think that's important. Every player's journey or path to success is going to be a little bit different. There are family dynamics. There are all kinds of dynamics that are going to play a role in the path a player chooses to take. And so I think the important thing is to not get focused on any particular path and understand that, it's individual decisions. So the most where I started to look was in kind of 1998 age level, because I think that's where we really started to see a change. That's like really where we started to see like this new generation start to impact the US soccer landscape. And so, some of the critical names there are Christian, Weston McKennie, Luca De La Torre, even Haji Wright was a massive youth player. And so like his path was worth looking at. And he's sort of reemerging. So interesting timing there. So yeah, they're, in the late 90s, I think you had a lot of really talented young players coming through. And there was not a lot of obvious, like, I'm going to join an MLS academy. I'm going to have a chance to play on the first team. And that exposure is going to get me to a big club in Europe. That just wasn't an obvious pathway. So you see a lot of these players going to European academies at a young age. And then I think in the early 2000 birth years, you started to see that shift where there were more examples and success stories of players being able to develop through the MLS academy, playing at a first team, playing on the senior team, and getting transfers to bigger clubs in Europe. And we can talk about a few of those examples. So those are kind of like the two main pathways you're seeing. The other one I don't think we'll talk much about, because I think it's always just going to be there because of the globality of Americans, is like the excuse me, players that just grew up in Europe, right? And or dual nationals that grew up in Europe or expat, families are expats. So the Sergino Dest, the Yunus Musas, even the Anthony Robinsons, Cameron Carter-Vickers, like those are always going to be there. They grew up in Europe. They're going to probably develop to the European academies and make their way there. Though I have a theory on that potentially changing in the coming years. We can also talk about.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to talk about maybe someone that exemplifies that newer age of a player coming through the MLS academies. And maybe we can just kick it off by touching on Jesus Ferreira being the first designated player that is playing for his homegrown team. Do you feel like that was an inflection point for what you're talking about, or is it more deep-seated in just the academy and moving into the first team before being sold to Europe?
I think that's I see that as sort of a separate trend, but also an important one, and something you're seeing more often for players that maybe develop a little later or aren't maybe seen initially as super high-end prospects. So I also think about a Georgi Mihailovic, where like you're seeing maybe players in their early 20s who maybe as an 18, 19-year-old wasn't getting a lot of attention from European clubs, but are now performing at really high levels in MLS. And I'm really interested to see how, like what their careers end up looking like. So like Jesus, obviously, being the first to develop through a program, become a DP, becoming a star in MLS, starting to have, a good amount of success with the national team. Georgie kind of the same, although he's not with, he came through the Chicago program, but, he's in 1998, took a little bit longer to develop, but now I think there's significant interest in Europe. So I think that's also a pathway where you stay with an MLS club a bit longer. You're developing in your early 20s, and I think there's a lot of good American players in MLS in their early 20s, and it'll be interesting to see like who stays and just makes a career out of being in the MLS, and who maybe gets a chance a little bit later. You're even seeing guys like an Austin Trusty, right? He's same class. I think he's in 1998, and he took a bit longer to develop, and now he's going to get a chance overseas.
Yeah, I feel like that move to Arsenal happened, and then everybody forgot about it again. Like, it came out of nowhere, and we also still forget that he is an Arsenal player. Maybe we can just finish up this conversation. I was actually going to shout out Justin Moran as well, at Kicksfish. He said a lot of the fans view going to the MLS as a promising player is basically giving up. And what you are seeing in a trend is kind of saying the exact opposite. So what are your views on maybe just tidying up that conversation around like what is best for each player is what it will get them to the highest level?
Yeah, I think what, to me, an inflection point in MLS Academy to MLS first team to getting a big chance in Europe was kind of, and Justin called this out, like Tyler Adams, Mark McKenzie, Brenden Aaronson, even like a Reggie Cannon. Like, these were big moments where I think young people are just looking for case studies or success stories and say, okay, that's something I could do. And what's really important now for MLS clubs is for all of them, for the most part, are doing a good job of investing in their academies, but not all of them have displayed a pathway from, if you perform, you will get an opportunity to play on the first team. And if your goal is to play in Europe, we will try to make that happen for you. Some clubs are, Philadelphia obviously did a really great job of that with Mark McKenzie, Brenden Aaronson, and you see their new generation of talent that'll likely have that same opportunity. So I think as a young person, and you see, you're at an academy that have shown that that's going to be a priority, like, that's a great option. I think Brenden Aaronson maybe and Tyler Adams are probably the best cases that we've seen go through that pathway where, Tyler's playing at a massive club. He's a contributor at a massive club, and he came through the Red Bulls program, like, all the way through. And the same with Brenden, who's now, looking to probably get a pretty significant transfer and made a huge impact in the Champions League. So that's exciting, and young people are going to see that and be excited by that. But that, there are other clubs that don't have those case studies, and a young person might look at themselves and say, I don't know if I'll have that opportunity. And so maybe the best path for me is to get to a European academy as soon as I can and, take my chances there. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that pathway, because I think we're seeing some interesting things happening in the kind of 2001 group, where a lot of kids that moved to European academies earlier, like, fighting to get traction, and even like, what we're seeing with some people coming back to MLS. And I think there's a lot of good discourse about whether that's good or not, right?
So are you kind of thinking about players like maybe Alex Mendez or even Matthew Hoppe? Like, are they kind of in that category?
Yeah, so I think you see a lot of it with some of the Galaxy Academy players and RSL Academy players. So the Ledesmas, Mendez, Yuli, they, a lot of them left academies early, tried their luck at different places in Europe, having varying success. As I said, every pathway is unique to the individual. But if they were, in the Union Academy or Red Bulls or Dallas, and they saw success stories happening, would they have stayed longer and kind of seen that through? Or maybe just like they were dead set on going to Europe, and it didn't matter where they were. So that's where the individualism comes into play. But yeah, you have to think that the more you see your club facilitating that pathway, the likely longer they are to stay, and that's only good for MLS, right? That's what they should be striving for.
So what do you think this means for fans of the national team going forward? Do we as fans need to change our perception of how development works and really think inclusively about the entire spectrum of how players develop? Because I think right now, yes, there are broadly talking people that prefer players to go to Europe as soon as possible, people that prefer players to stay in MLS and get as much playing time as possible. If you could talk to the entire fan base about how they should expect this development to work going forward because of the sweeping changes that you're seeing across the development landscape, how should we change our perception of how these things work?
Yeah, that's an important question. Thanks for asking it. Yeah, I think to me, the important thing is to be patient and to know that there are lots of paths to success. And I think what we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years is that there are lots of viable paths to success. You can be there are going to be hopefully more, but a few high level prospects like a Gio Reyna, who they should get to Europe as soon as possible because their likelihood of succeeding and coming through a European academy are high. And so the faster they can get to better competition is probably a good thing. But there are also players who are good prospects that it's already hard enough, I think, being an international player or an American player in a European academy. And development pathways are not linear. They're not the same for everyone. And so staying at an MLS academy where I think we found, and something that was really enlightening to me at the GA Cup recently, is they're competing and performing at really high levels. And I think coaching and the infrastructure here is getting better and better. So it is not a negative thing for a player to be 20, 21, coming through an MLS academy, playing with the first team, and then getting a look in Europe. That oftentimes mean they just took a little bit longer to mature and develop. Because one thing you're seeing, especially with the 2003s, is players who stick through academy and play in the first team, they're getting chances with their European first teams faster. Whereas I think you see players that go to European academies early, it's taken a really long time for them to get a chance. And I think that just speaks to how grueling and difficult it is to make it through a European academy. So I think in a lot of cases, staying with MLS is a good thing. And we're seeing a lot of that with, George Bello and the recent kind of class of players that moved over, Pepe, Justin Che, Kevin Paredes. Not all of them a ton, but they're on first team squads and they're getting some opportunity. And you aren't seeing that with a lot of the 2001s, the 2000s, because they hadn't proved themselves as first team players yet.
Yeah. And that's a good transition for kind of moving into this Generation Adidas Cup that has just happened, which featured some of the best youth teams in the world. Can you tell us what happened there and kind of what stuck out to you the most?
Yeah. So, and I should say I'm fairly green when it comes to like the youth academy landscape in the US. I'm probably only a year or two into it. So I'm learning as well. and getting a lot of good information from people who've been doing it for a while. So it was my first real GA Cup experience. It hasn't been around since 2019 because of the pandemic. So yeah, a lot of huge academies, like massive global powers and development powers were at the GA Cup. So and then all MLS academies were there. So Manchester United, Roma, Flamengo, River from Argentina, Valencia, a lot of the big Liga MX powers, Tigres, Monterrey, Pumas. Like, so we're talking like big academies coming to the US to play our MLS academies. It was pretty cool, pretty fun.
Yeah. So one thing that happened there is that Seattle's youth team won, I believe, the U17 age group. Yes. That was quite surprising because they have two players that are eligible for that team, Leyva and Vargas, who are currently with Seattle's first team and actually getting minutes there. So what happened there to allow a youth team without their two best prospects to flourish in this tournament? And maybe, like, are there other names that have now emerged on that team that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, and small credit, it's Reed, Baker, Whiting, and Vargas, who are the 205s. Okay. Leyva's in 03. But yes, I mean, Baker Whiting played with them up until, I want to say, like quarterfinals. But he got called back to Seattle. Obed Vargas, who's probably, he's the first 2005 that's really made a massive impact in a first team. Yeah, both didn't play with Seattle, and they ended up winning the tournament, which is remarkable, right? Like those would without a doubt be their two best players in that age group. So I think it speaks to a couple things. I think broadly what I saw is MLS academies being able to hang with some of the bigger academies in the world, which was for me really exciting and encouraging to see. But Seattle specifically, yeah, I think it speaks to the program, right? Because you wouldn't, I mean, necessarily, like, the academy's jobs aren't typically to win tournaments. Their jobs are to develop a game model throughout the system and to develop stars and impact players, which Seattle's obviously showing that they can do. But they just have such a great culture and system that they won the 2019 one as well. And they were the first MLS Academy to win at that level at the GA Cup. So they're back-to-back winners technically, which just goes to show how good of a job they're doing of, like, implementing their philosophy and a winning culture throughout the entire system.
Yeah.
So I think
were there other teams that, sorry.
I was going to answer the second part of your question, which, some players that stood out, for Seattle, aside from, Reed, Baker, Whiting, who didn't play the last couple games. And yeah, so just a few names I'd call out. One player that got a lot of attention, and rightfully so. He scored a lot of goals in kind of the playoff portion of the tournament, which was Christopher Aquino. He's a left-footed 2006, very smooth on the ball, had some nice goals, really comfortable in traffic, which I like to see at a young age, like knows how to just get out of sticky situations. So he performed really well. I think Stuart Hawkins is a center back that's played with the U17s of the U.S. Youth National Team. I think he might have won player of the tournament at that level. And in general, Seattle was just really sound defensively, and so he played a big role in that. And there's a 2007 who played up. The pronunciation is Etienne Villard. He's a winger. He also scored in the final. He scored the second goal in the final. there are a few 2007s playing up a level in the tournament that I saw, and he was one of the better ones. Just super high energy, pacey winger that really kind of stepped up in that final. So yeah, there's some exciting players to watch.
When you say years, it's like it doesn't immediately hit you, but that means those players are 14 or 15 years old.
I know. I feel a bit, sometimes I feel a bit like it's like wrong. Like they're young, like just let them be, you know? But
yeah.
I think people need to know and be excited about the next generation of players.
Well, let's talk about that for a quick second, and then I want to ask you just to wrap up some of the other teams and players that you had seen that really stuck out to you. But on that point, like how indicative of future success are tournaments like the GA Cup and performances from players like that in these tournaments?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know if I'm going to have like a super sound answer to it. I think maybe because I don't have a lot of like historical data, but in just watching the GA Cup, I think one thing you could clearly take away is this year MLS academies performed much better against these international academies than they ever have before. So I think you cannot discount that. And I think just the eyes watching these matches, they're hanging in. You know, they're technically, tactically pretty on par. I think at times physically, you see some of the other academies just look a bit bigger, stronger, faster, and I think that just speaks to a little bit the priority of youth sports, you know, in other countries versus ours. Like top athletes in Brazil and England, they're playing football. There's a lot more competition here, obviously, for young people and what sports they're playing. But I think what we should be encouraged by is at the U17 and U15 level, there were, you know, really strong MLS teams that were taking it to some of what we all consider the best academies in the world. Like teams that, you know, didn't, you know, these tournaments are tricky like any tournament, but like some of the more impressive teams that put on the most impressive performances didn't make it super far in the tournament for lots of different reasons. But I look at like what the Union U17s did to Flamengo. Like they went toe to toe and took it to them, like beat them. LAFC went, LA Galaxy went toe to toe with Manchester United. Like I think outplayed them in the run of play in the round of 16, and had some players that were just incredible. I think Alejandro Alcala got a lot of love because he was just ripping through Manchester United's left side of the defense. And it's just like that kind of stuff I don't think you were seeing as much 4 or 5 years ago. And so that's reason I think for US soccer fans to be excited is that there's just a bigger sampling of players, or what people call lottery tickets, that are high-end players that could make it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the general consensus is that there is more volume of players coming through, more volume of successful academies that can develop players like this, instead of picking one lottery ticket at a time, like Christian Pulisic, sending them to Dortmund and hoping and praying that he becomes a player. Whereas now there are 100 players that conceivably are at Christian Pulisic's level at 16 or 17 years old. And it's just how do they develop from there? But it's the volume that I feel like has changed throughout the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I would agree. I wouldn't say they're all Christian Pulisic level, but yes.
Special case.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that tournament, there were U15s, there were U17s. You mentioned the winger that got some love, the highlights against Manchester United. I'll make sure to put that up on the screen so people can watch that as we're talking about it. But were there any other players that you just want to make sure the USMNT fan base knows and is looking out for?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult for me to keep it tidy. I did write an article on the U17s and kind of went pretty deep on like who stuck out to me, which we can get out to people.
And that's on chasingacup.com?
It is, yeah.
All right. Put it as a link down below and put it up on screen.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll just call out a couple names by level. Let's see. So on the 2005 side, a couple of players that stood out to me. Don't like saying stick out. Pierre from Philadelphia Union is a striker, and obviously I think the USMNT community are begging for striker options. So I'll start with him. He in that Flamengo game, that is the one that was broadcasted that I watched, he came on at half. He's a player that's already playing for MLS Next Pro, their Union 2 side. Kind of reminds me of DK in terms of a profile, just super athletic, likes to get in behind defenses, showed some really good movement off the ball and scored a really nice goal versus Flamengo. He is definitely a player to keep an eye on. Another 2005 that I'd call out is someone who's actually already on a homegrown and playing a little bit in MLS. I think he scored his first professional goal last night, is Nico Chairez. So he's a center midfielder for San Jose Earthquakes. As I said, playing a little bit. I watched the Earthquakes play River's another, I think they've won this tournament more than any academy. Just like really strong on the ball, good, like controlling midfielder, really good kind of in pushing the game forward. I thought he performed really well in the game that I watched. I'll go to the 2006 level. Some young people that really stood out to me was Cruz Medina, which I think there's a lot of excitement around. And again, another San Jose Earthquakes player, just super, super talented on the ball, like really creative, knows how to get out of sticky situations, knows how to get in dangerous situations. He's a 2006. He's played a lot for the U17s. He was also impressive in that River game. And then I was really impressed with a lot of Inter Miami players. I think San Jose and Inter Miami are some of the fastest emerging academies in MLS. They're in talent-rich areas, and I think if they can really figure out their sort of academy to first team integration, and it'll be interesting to see what develops with the Earthquakes with the change in management there. But those are two clubs that have a ton of talent that could really, if they took like a Philadelphia Union type model, could really start to become exporters of talent. But some guys on Inter Miami that stood out to me is another 2006 named Tyler Hall. He captains the U17s for the U.S. national team, the youth national team. He got injured and didn't play in the playoff for Inter Miami, and I think that was a big reason that they didn't push forward. I think they were the most talented U17s, and they lost to Seattle in the semis. He's an incredible center back prospect. He's not the tallest right now, so if he does grow, I think he could be one of the best center back prospects we've seen come through our system. He's really fast, great leader, as evidenced by captaining the U17s. Really comfortable on the ball. Really, really good in 1v1 situations. Good in the air. He's athletic, so his height at this level right now it's not really a problem. Yeah. But yeah, he's another one that I'm really excited about. And then I'll just I'll go really too young, I think. But another player that I'll end with is DeCarlo Guerra. He's a 2008, which is scary to say. He plays for LAFC U15s, so kind of playing up a bit, because it's mainly 2007s who play at that level. He's just like an incredibly talented, skillful six. He's probably the best 2008 that I've seen, though I don't really scout at that level too often. But he's LAFC were kind of like Inter Miami. I thought clearly the most talented team, but just in a knockout tournament, things happen. Just your quintessential like deep lying playmaking midfielder who's just reads the game incredibly well, progresses the ball. I think the type of player that Greg Berhalter wants to play the six. He's obviously very young and has a long ways to go, but he's really exciting prospect as well.
Probably it will happen where Greg Berhalter is not the coach at the time where he's ready to come of age and join the national team, but we will take all the sixes we can get. We will take all the strikers, the number 9s, the center backs. So Marcus Chairez, thank you so much for joining the channel. Thank you for teaching me and hopefully everyone watching a little bit about our youth system and the pipeline to the pros. Do you have anything left to say to the people?
No, just thank you for having me on. I am very open to chatting on Twitter or really any other forum. So if you want to learn more, if you have questions, I am always open to chat. I love talking about this stuff. And so, yeah, just thank you for the time. It's been fun.
Everyone, go follow Marcus. Thank you for joining us and teaching us. Like the video and subscribe to the channel for more USMNT. And we'll see everyone next time. And thanks so much to our sponsor for today's video, Bet Online.